Welcome back everyone. Today we will be taking a look at two games that were heavily inspired by the original 1994 Windjammers release for the Neo Geo, including the recently released direct sequel Windjammers 2 for Xbox and Switch, and Disc Jam, which was a more modern take on this extreme frisbee action sport that came out a few years ago in 2018 for Switch and PlayStation. In fact, maybe because of my age, but when Disc Jam was released, that was actually the first time I've ever heard of Windjammers, since everyone was saying how similar these games were. Well, 4 years have passed and Windjammers 2 is now here. So let's take a look at it, what's changed, as well as a trip down memory lane with Disc Jam. For anyone that wasn't aware, Windjammers 2 is technically a direct sequel to the 1994 original, which you can see some of that footage of the first game here. It became a cult classic due to its competitive nature being an arcade sports title and sharing pick up and play mechanics reminiscent of Pong in a lot of ways. The original was ported over first to the Wii in 2010 before being ported again, this time to PS4 and Switch in 2017. Windjammers 2 is the first actual sequel, officially 28 years later, after the studio that had the rights to the IP went bankrupt and sold off their assets. Since it took so long to release a true sequel, I think that's partly why you saw the inspired creation of Disc Jam, a game you may have never heard of, created by a two-man team at High Horse Entertainment. Simply put, it's a 3D behind-the-player version of Windjammers and conceptually shares a ton of similarities with its gameplay. As much as I loved Disc Jam upon release, the player base for it unfortunately died off incredibly fast when I went to revisit it for the purpose of this review, to the point where you can really only maybe find an online game through Discord or if you have a friend that has a copy, although it's just as good offline as it's ever been. In terms of gameplay for both games, after you've selected from a handful of characters who vary slightly in power and speed, you'll be pitted against an opponent in a battle of throwing a glorified frisbee back and forth. Points are awarded when your opponent can't catch the frisbee and it flies past them, or if it drops somewhere on their side of the court. In Windjammers 2, points are awarded depending on which scoring zone the frisbee flies through behind your opponent, with every level having slightly different scoring variations. In Disc Jam, all levels play the same, with points being awarded for longer rallies, meaning the longer the point goes on, the more points you earn for winning that point. Both games typically play out in a best of 2 out of 3 set match, with a first to 15 system in Windjammers and a first to 50 system in Disc Jam. The game is all about testing your reflexes and reading the strategy of your opponent, and can be surprisingly deep. They play incredibly fast with little room for error, although Windjammers points and matches tend to be over considerably quicker than Disc Jam. I will say I like the mechanic of getting more points for longer rallies in Disc Jam the most, which really has you sweating as the frisbee gets faster and faster, although both scoring styles work perfectly fine.
Miss 2 points!
To help yourself in either game, you have a number of similar abilities such as curving throws, lobbing them over your opponent's head, blocking, or even charging up your over-the-top power shot. I actually found the gameplay to Disc Jam a bit more accessible since it gives you a touch more time to absorb what's happening on screen, at least before the points ramp up, with more clear feedback to what on earth just happened in the game, through an awesome in-game replay system, as well as a nice tutorial for newcomers. Honestly, I found the actual gameplay to be pretty much flawless and perfectly balanced in terms of an arcade game. One downfall to Windjammers 2 is that it doesn't have a tutorial at all, and the how to play section doesn't tell you nearly enough info in my opinion, so you're left in the dark until you just figure it out, which for how fast the game plays is not remotely ideal for newcomers, presenting a bigger hurdle than there really needs to be. This can lead to a considerable number of frustrations early on trying to digest what's happening, Why a tutorial talking about basic tips, scoring, and strategies wasn't included is a bit of an oversight for an action sports title like this. I really don't think people should be expected to remember how a game from 1994 played and scored.
3 points. Bravo! Congratulations!
Windjammers 2 has 3 main game modes that are all just slight variations of the same game. There's an offline versus mode, which is a good place to start for newcomers, an arcade mode, which essentially acts as the pseudo single-player mode, pitting you against a series of 5 or so computer opponent matches before getting to the end. And finally, there's an online mode containing both ranked and unranked matches, which is probably where you'll spend most of your time. Everything is unlocked from the start in terms of characters and modes, so the arc of the game mostly comes down to yourself wanting to get better at it, and playing the various levels that all have slight scoring variations. I like the arcade mode, but wish that there was more of a career mode somewhere with maybe more things to unlock. My theory is that this was a design choice to make it feel more like the original Windjammers and harness its arcade roots.
5 points. Bravo! Well done.
Disc Jam offers a similar set of game modes with 2 additional aspects and 1 big caveat. I'll start with the good, and that's the fact that you can play both singles and doubles matches, which is incredibly fun and mixes up the gameplay from getting too repetitive. Disc Jam also has a ton to unlock from new characters, frisbees, gamer tag slogans, and more. However, the one big caveat that I hinted at earlier is the game is completely dead online these days. Back in the day when people actually played it, online worked great, but now there's a close to 0% chance you'll find an online game to play, which is incredibly unfortunate as much of the game's infrastructure was designed around this aspect. I couldn't even get anyone to play over Discord, which is truly a travesty. Essentially, the game should be considered a local multiplayer game only at this point. Gameplay and feature-wise, Disc Jam actually gets the slight advantage for me, but Windjammers 2 gets the nod from a technical perspective and several nods from how amazing it looks. Disc Jam definitely has the feel of a budget title due to its blandness in the menus, graphics, and characters. This isn't too surprising considering it's from an indie studio of literally just 2 people who managed to create a balanced gem of an action game. But it's clear the game could have benefited from better art direction and polish to make it maybe a little more inviting. Windjammers 2, on the other hand, hits you immediately in the face with bright colors, fantastic hand-drawn art, character cutscenes, and better music, all of which would make anyone watching want to play immediately with all the life and charm it brings to screen. Windjammers 2 is as true of a sequel as you could possibly expect, which works out gameplay-wise and artistically, even if it leaves you wanting a bit more to do. Disc Jam also mechanically has some great gameplay, even better than Windjammers in my opinion, with the inclusion of doubles matches and a replay system, and there was a bit more incentive to keep playing considering the plethora of items you can unlock. Where it struggles a bit is that artistically it comes across really bland when compared side by side with Windjammers 2, and the fact that there is simply no one playing this game anymore, which is an absolute shame considering how fun it is. There really is no reason why, to me, it shouldn't have had a large following of esports fans, and it's sad to see that's not the case. In the end, I like how Disc Jam plays a little bit more than Windjammers 2, but Windjammers is a much more attractive game and will have a much larger following and lifespan, which you really need to factor into the equation if you are thinking about picking it up. I honestly wish I could combine the best aspects of each game into one glorious frisbee throwing experience, although both individually still get a full recommendation from me. I only hope that games like Windjammers 2 and Disc Jam continue to breed more and more original action sports video games, which would be a huge win for all of us.